All right, here we go.
You know it. You tell the story.
You tell the whole damn world this is bear territory.
Woo! All right, let's go. Let's go.
Go Bears!
Welcome to Tell the Whole Damn World. We're the podcast for Golden Bear fans who love the University of California. If you're like us and are unabashedly and unapologetically all about Cal, you found the right place. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Reza Serafinejad. It's Friday, May 23rd, 2025, and how many of you out there know how we got the name the Golden Bears? Well, we're glad you tuned in because that's exactly what Leslie Mitchell and I will talk about in today's Cal History episode. But before we get to that, this podcast is entirely a labor of love and a reflection of how much we love our university. Would you be kind enough to take a minute to help tell the whole damn world about us? Like and subscribe, share us on your social media, encourage all your Cal friends to go to our website, tellthewholedamnworld.com. Speaking on behalf of all of us here, including Ahmad and Leslie, we sincerely appreciate all of you out there. And for those of you out there just listening, please remember that we also post all of these episodes on YouTube. So when you have a little time, you can always go there to watch us too. We're trying to build up our subscriber base there. So if you have a Gmail account and are watching us, please log in to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Okay, give me just a moment and I'll be right back with Leslie to talk about the 1895 track and field team that went back east, thoroughly dominated the competition, and forged our identity as the Golden Bears.
This week in Cal History.
By now, I'm sure all of you know our resident Cal History rock star, Leslie Mitchell. She's a third-generation Cal alum and lifelong Golden Bear fan who writes articles about notable people associated with our university. You can visit her website, calbearshistory.com, or follow her on Twitter under calbearshistory, where she posts stories of interesting students, faculty, and alums. Leslie is a wonderful resource when it comes to learning more about prominent people associated with our university who have done great things in this world. We couldn't be luckier to have her as part of the show. Today, Leslie's going to tell us all about how the University of California sports teams became known as the Golden Bears, and it has everything to do with the sensational 1895 Cal track and field team, the banners they carried on an epic East Coast trip, and Professor Charles Mills Gayley. Welcome again to the show, Leslie.
Well, thank you, Reza, as always, for your kind comments. The 1895 track team is, we owe them, more than we can say. We would not be Golden Bears without them.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm so pumped up for this episode because, just the idea that prior to 1895, I guess reading your notes and the articles that you've written about it, we were simply known as the Blue and Golds.
Yeah, that was... And by the way, that's where our friends down in Palo Alto were also known as the Cardinal before they became the Indians and then went back to the Cardinal. And we were called the Blue and Gold. So yeah, we didn't have any mascot or anything like that. We were just the Blue and Gold.
Right.
That was the common thing to do at the time.
Right. And it's just like the idea of us not having that identity, it just is so intertwined with everything about.
It's so alien
Cal.
to think of us as not being bears.
Well, exactly. And you didn't say go Bears back then, right?
Probably not. Not until 1895. Not for
Right.
those first 20-something years of the university. There were no... Although they must have thought about bears a little bit because they had those bear banners. But I guess that's, probably came from the California state flag.
Right.
I would assume.
Right. So, So
1895, well, it was actually a couple of years earlier. I think about 1893, people at Cal started talking about, maybe we should send a team to the East Coast and play some of those big boys out there. Because at the time, there were some schools in California. Stanford had just been started, had just taken in students. USC was around. There were some other teams in the Northwest, but there weren't like the big prestige teams. Those were all back east. The Ivy League, hard as it is to imagine today, the Ivy League was considered the ultimate great sports conference. So, yeah, I know. It makes you
Right.
kind of laugh, doesn't it?
Right. That's kind of surprising. I mean, man, like you just imagine the Ivy League back then, and the SEC probably wasn't even in existence back then. Or
Well, the Ivy League you have to give them credit. The Harvard-Yale boat races in 1856 was what started competitive sports between colleges in the United States. So, we wanted, I guess the guys in California wanted to go back there and show what they could do to the big boys back east. And no
Right.
team from the West Coast, and no one from the West Coast had ever played an Eastern team, whether traveling east or them traveling west or meeting in the middle. And no East Coast and West Coast team had ever played in any sport, not just track, but any sport.
I mean, how fantastic is that to think, right? That this was an era when, there was no intercollegiate sports between the East Coast and the West Coast. And so the University of California was the very first to send a team back east. And, that to me, of all the other universities and everything else, we were the very first to have done that. And they had quite a bit of success from the sound of it.
Oh, yes, they kicked butt, really, to put it elegantly. Yeah, it was, in fact, no team from Cal had ever even traveled outside the state of California to play, not to Nevada, not to Oregon, nowhere.
Wow.
And, you may wonder, well, why track? Because, now track is at colleges. I mean, it's a big deal at some schools, but it's not it's hardly a major sport.
Right.
But back in 1895, it was one of the big sports. It was football was number one. And then track and baseball were pretty much tied as the second most big time sports. Basketball didn't even exist. I mean, it had been invented, but it wasn't played at the collegiate level much at that point.
Yeah.
So the track team was a big deal. It was a big deal for us. It was a big deal back east as well.
And it sounds like the students back, because there was some talk of trying to organize something to have this big competition, but we would need to send our athletes to the East Coast on
the
this
Eastern
big
schools
trip,
sure aren't going to come out here. You knew
right?
that.
Right.
Some things don't change. East Coast bias has never changed. They're going to say, "Well, we have to start games at 7:00 at night." Oh, wait a
minute. and so the students themselves actually got together and discussed the idea of doing this and actually raised funds for this trip, right? To send our athletes.
At that time, the students basically controlled athletics. There was no athletic director. There was a gentleman, a math professor named George Edwards, who was a member of the first graduating class from Cal, who was sort of I don't know what the official term was. He was the chairman of the committee that was organized to start this trip. And by the way, Edwards Field, the track stadium, was named in his honor. And if you ever walk by there on Bancroft, there's a very elaborate and emotional dedication to him carved on the side of Edwards Stadium. So Professor Edwards, I love that our track stadium is named for a math professor. It's so Cal.
That's great.
So he was in charge of the committee, but the rest of them were all students, and they put it up to a vote of the student body, and it was unanimously approved. Yes, we should send our track team back east. According to the report in the Blue and Gold yearbook, within 20 minutes, they'd already raised $1,000 from contributions from the students, which was a lot of money in 1895, and in fact was about a third of what would ultimately be the whole cost of the trip.
Right. That's not an insignificant amount of money back in that era, for sure.
No. So they sent the team manager, who was a student manager named Arthur North. They sent him back by train to the East Coast. Well, they sent telegrams, will you meet with us? And they sent him back by train, and he met with these various schools, and he got commitments from several schools that, okay, yeah, we'll play you guys. Princeton, Penn, and then like the Chicago Athletic Association that was having a big meet with a bunch of schools from the Midwest, Denver, at the Denver Athletic Association. There was the various schools that agreed. Union College in Schenectady, New York. So they made these arrangements, and they were still making arrangements while they were on the trip. They added a couple of extra stops on the way. So it was all arranged, and they left from the Berkeley train station, which is located on Shattuck Avenue, right at Center and Shattuck. There was a big train station, sort of where the BART station is now.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, it was there for decades.
Wow.
So they pulled out of that train station. There was a bunch of students there to wave them goodbye and wish them luck, and off they went.
Wow. And I mean, that must have been a long trek, a long trip. And you're talking about track and field athletes. I guess in reading your article, every time the train stopped, they would get out and do some running and do
run
something.
Around on the platform or wherever they could run around. Yeah, which is kind of goofy.
Yeah, but I can completely understand that. I mean, after just being kind of boxed up and, not able to move very much over
and they're
a
trying to keep in shape
trip.
because the meet was going to be 3 days after they got to, they were headed to Princeton, New Jersey. And so, yeah, it was 3 days after they arrived in Princeton. So they didn't want to be completely, and it took 6 days to get there on the train.
Right.
They tried to do like gymnastics, stretching stuff on the train and then run around at the platforms, which is, not the best way to stay in perfect shape, but it was the best they could do.
Yeah. And there were, how many athletes did we send? It was 11 athletes?
11 athletes. And when they got to Princeton at 3:00 in the morning, they arrived. So they must have been kind of tired. Also, the heat apparently was a big shock to these California boys, these Bay Area boys, I should say. I live in Sacramento, so 90 degrees doesn't seem hot to me. However,
well, I think it was also the humidity, right? The heat and the humidity
Bay Area
together.
Boys, but yeah, the humidity. But for any of us who've spent time on the East Coast in the summer, you know how bad that humidity can be. And
right.
Yeah, so the couple of them were like prostrated by the heat. And it took them quite a while to get adjusted to participating in sports in that weather.
Yeah, and that can't be very easy to compete in those kinds of conditions, especially if you're not used to it.
Exactly. And if you just got off the train from a 6-day trip.
Right.
So they get to Princeton. There's 11 Cal guys. Well, Princeton's got 28 guys competing for them.
That sounds like an advantage.
The Princeton wanted the rules to be, and this was agreed, that you get points for first place, and you also get lesser amount of points for second place. Unfortunately for Cal, we didn't have enough athletes even to have second place, to have more than one athlete participating in every event. Some of them, we only had one guy that did that event, like the hammer throw. I mean, we only had one guy that did hammer throw. So automatically Princeton was going to get the second place points, assuming we got the first place points.
Sure.
Did, of course. And then there were 12 events total, and one of them we couldn't compete in at all because it was pole vault, and we didn't have a pole vaulter, which is kind of a specialized skill.
Yeah, that's very much a specialized skill, I'd say. Wow. So we didn't compete in that at all. So
we
already right there.
We lost all the first place and second place points on.
Right.
Princeton got all those points handed to them.
It doesn't sound very fair.
Doesn't sound fair, does it? But it didn't matter. It did not matter. Cal managed to win. Of the 12 events, Cal managed to win 8, including the one that we had to forfeit. So the 4 wins by Princeton included the forfeit. And then we won 6 of the 12 second places, even though for 3 of the second places, we didn't have an athlete competing for second place.
Wow.
So that's pretty much a butt kicking, in my opinion.
I'll say. Was there an actual score that was kept for that?
Final score, it's not that impressive a final score. I believe it was 69 to 59 points.
Well, still, I'd say that still sounds pretty good.
You consider that we had to forfeit 1 of the 12 events, first and second place, and we had to forfeit 3 of the second places.
Right. I mean, it wasn't by the skin of our teeth, is what I mean, by any stretch.
But we went in 8 of the 12 events. The East Coast media was stunned when you look at the newspaper reports from the time, they're just like, oh my gosh, these guys from California, how did they do this? And they just got off the train and they were on the train all that time and they arrive here and they've only got 11 guys and they just whipped Princeton. I think there's a headline in the Philadelphia Times that says Princeton wasn't even in the game. They were just gushing all over. And of course, before the events, everybody was back east, as we are so used to, as all Western schools are so used to. All the people in the East looked down on them and said, well, it's nice that these little guys from California want to come out here and compete, but they're not real athletes.
Right.
Had been sort of the attitude.
Right. Well, and then, so from that, then they went on, and this was like a 3-week tour?
It was a 7-week tour.
Oh, a 7-week tour.
Including the train travel, which was a week each way.
Right, right. And so next up was Pennsylvania?
University of Pennsylvania, which was considered like the best, or certainly one of the best track programs at that moment. And that was they put up a much better showing than Princeton did. They were leading. That one was only scored by events. It wasn't scored by points, as far as I can tell. There were no second place points and all of that. Sure. So Cal was trailing in events 7-6 going into the final event. And our captain, Fred Koch, that it was a 440 run, and he was not really a 440 guy. But somehow he managed to pull out the win, and it ended up tied with Penn.
Nice.
And then we went on and beat the University of Illinois. Oh, wait, before that, we beat the heck out of Union College in Schenectady, New York.
59-39? That's a blowout.
Yes. And then we started taking the trip back, and we stopped in Chicago, where they were having this big meet with all these Western schools, including schools like Wisconsin and Michigan and all the big boys. And again, we had 11 guys who'd been on this road trip by that time, by like 4 weeks by that time. And we won. We beat Michigan. We beat Wisconsin. We beat all these other big time schools. We had 11 guys. They had 28 guys from Michigan, 20 guys from Wisconsin, or maybe it was the other way around. But anyway, all the teams had more than 20 guys.
Yeah, and we lost one guy because I guess he had been injured in one of the events, right? So we were down to only 10 athletes.
He had the infamous strained tendon. Yes, yep. And he was unable to compete for a while. But nevertheless, Cal won the event, and we got a big silver trophy, and we were proclaimed the champions of the West because, of course, people back east think that Chicago is the West, which I've never really understood.
Right. It's pretty far east to be considered west.
That's what I've always said. Look at a map, draw a line down the middle, and that's east. That's not how the East Coast people look at it.
Right. And
but anyway, all of this time, one of the athletes, the hammer throw guy, Robert Edgren, who was also discus and shot put and did all the throwing stuff. He was also an aspiring newspaper reporter, and he had a part-time job with the San Francisco Examiner that was run by William Randolph Hearst at that time. And when the trip was proposed, Hearst told him, I want you to wire us reports every day about what's happening on this event. So every night he was teased by his fellow athletes because he would spend all night writing these reports and then going down to the Western Union office to telegraph the reports back to San Francisco. And then he's supposed to compete and take the train and do all these other things. But he did it, and it became like this big saga in Berkeley and in the greater Bay Area where everybody was following this team. I think there was this whole sense of not just university pride, but West Coast pride of, they're back there showing those Eastern people that, we really are something, that we're a big deal.
Right. And there's Robert Edgren. I mean, this guy sounded like a massive guy. He was 6'5", right? And 230 pounds or something in that era.
Yes, that was enormous. I mean, 6'5" is still
today
a big guy.
is still huge, right? Yeah, but more than
25 doesn't sound that big today for a 6'5" guy, but back then it was, that was almost,
right.
It was kind of mind blowing.
Herculean, right? Amazing.
Yeah, and so he ultimately later became a big time sports writer.
Right. And he was also like a cartoonist. I mean, he would draw and illustrate all these different things, if I
Well,
understand
what you
things
find is, yeah,
correctly.
newspapers couldn't publish photographs at that time.
Mhm.
So they'd have to do drawings. And I think, maybe we'll show that on the YouTube, we'll show that some drawings of the events that look a little bit funny, but it's what they were able to put into the papers. And
Right.
so he had gone to the Art Institute in San Francisco, which at that time was affiliated with the University of California, and had taken art classes there as well as doing his writing. And so he actually illustrated all of his own stories for years. And he was a very good artist. I've seen a number of his
Yeah.
drawings, and they're actually still, there's collections of them today. They go for high prices. They're considered really good stuff.
That's pretty cool. And then, like, I guess he really forged a real identity after Cal as a sports journalist and covering boxing in particular, and also, well, very famously, and we didn't even mention this point, which is obviously a big one, but he was Cal's first Olympian back in 1906, right, in Athens.
Right.
So that's pretty darn cool.
And some people may say, wait a minute, Athens Olympics was 1896. But actually, they had what they called the Inculcated Games in 1906 in Athens. The Olympics were kind of a dud up to that point. 1896 went okay, but then 1900 in Paris was kind of a flop because they didn't really have it. It was scheduled over a period of months, and there were no big opening ceremonies or anything. It was just kind of, people kind of wandering in and wandering out and doing some events like croquet, which is my favorite. Croquet was an Olympic sport.
Croquet. Wow.
So they,
Yeah.
So that, and then in 1904, they had him in St. Louis, and that was another bust because nobody wanted to go to St. Louis. And it was Americans and a few Canadians, and nobody else went. And again, it was over a period of months. And so it wasn't like a focus of anything. And so they got this idea that, to try to save the Olympics, they would have an Olympics in Athens in 1906, sort of in between the two regular scheduled ones. And that's where they came up with the first ceremony of athletes entering by country with their country's flag.
The opening ceremonies.
The opening ceremonies of raising the flag of the country of the winning athlete, of having a closing ceremony at all, and they had it in a compressed space of a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean,
that becomes a big event.
Yeah, that is such a better format. It has to be bookended, and you want to kind of compress that amount of time so it's just not, meandering on for months. That sounds ridiculous. It was going to spend months there.
And nobody paid attention because it was just sort of, there's a track event. There's a whatever, water polo, whatever. But that's where Robert Edgren was in the Olympics. He was in both discus and shot put.
But to get back to the 1895 track team, if I understand things correctly, there were 3 of our athletes who came back with American records. And one of them was Robert Edgren with the hammer throw, having the American record. And then also somebody who, I guess, tied the record for the 100-yard dash.
Right. James Scoggins. He got the 100-yard record, which of course is the big one in track. Of course, 100 meters now is the big one. But the funny thing about that is when you look at him and the other guys that he's tied with, you look at the record books, they're all listed at 10 seconds flat because they didn't have the kind of timing stuff that they have now. So it was like, if it wasn't 10 seconds, it wasn't 11 seconds, then it was 10 seconds.
Right.
So you have like 6 guys all at exactly 10 seconds.
That's pretty funny.
And then another athlete, Ernest Dyer, he had the American record in the 120-yard hurdle. So 3 American, in addition to kicking butt on the East Coast, in addition to winning the Western Championship and getting a trophy and all the rest of it, 3 American records.
Well, and then on one of their last trips, they were competing against Denver. University of Denver.
It was at the Denver Athletic Club, and it was sort of like a bunch of schools and a bunch of individuals. Pretty much,
I see.
they billed it as all of Colorado versus California. So pretty much anyone who was a serious track competitor in Colorado could come and try out to participate in it.
Right, but talk about a blowout. I mean, we won 62-22.
We did.
That's pretty well. And here's the thing that I thought was really pretty cool after reading your article was that there was a group of Stanford fans who were there, or at least people who had gone to Stanford, who were openly rooting and hollering and just, doing everything they could to help support the Golden Bears. Well, they were the blue and gold
Golden Bears. Yes. Yeah, I read when I was reading this article, because a lot of my research I do by looking at old newspaper articles. And I was reading this article when they said there were a bunch of Stanford people there. My first thought was, oh no, they probably were booing us and whatever. No, they were thrilled to support us, which I love. I guess, again, it was that us against the East, sort of like us with the ACC thing these days, where, they're still Stanford and we still don't like them, but there's sort of a certain amount of solidarity about what we are going through.
Well, and I had a lot of animosity towards Stanford for a lot of years, as any blue and gold blooded Cal fan would expect to have. But that kind of all went away a little bit. Maybe not all went away, but it went away to
not all go away.
Right,
yeah.
But not all go away. But it went away to some degree.
Showing up here wearing a red shirt.
But it went away to some degree with the conference realignment, just because we realized we really needed each other,
Yeah, and when Robert Edgren wrote a story about, one of his telegraphed back home stories about that, and he expressed his warm thanks to the Stanford fans for their West Coast solidarity.
Right. No, that's so cool.
that was our last stop on the way back. That was the track team's last stop on the way back. And they arrived home in Berkeley on June 27th. They left on May 2nd and they got home on June 27th. So it was a long, hard trip. They did 9 track meets on the whole trip. And so they were probably pretty tired. But when they got to the station, they for whatever reason, they arrived in Oakland rather than Berkeley. And they were met by a mob of Cal fans.
So cool.
People were just so excited about what had happened. Again, they were following it with bated breath. It's hard to imagine you're following telegraphed reports of track meets and everybody's so excited about it. We're used to the instant gratification days of you can watch anything you want on television. But
yeah, and I mean, like you pointed out at the beginning of this, is that track and field in that era was a major thing, second only really to football and kind of tied with baseball in terms of popularity. So, this was pretty major for the Bay Area and all of the West Coast for us to have gone out there and to have, whipped the butts of all those teams there on the East Coast and in the middle of the country. I mean, that really cemented our place at a very early juncture of Cal being a sports team to be reckoned with.
And the fans, they'd already arranged to have a big gala dinner that night at the Olympic Club in San Francisco. So the Cal fans and Cal supporters, they escorted them all down to the ferry station, got on the ferry, took them over to San Francisco, and they literally had a torchlight parade down Market Street in San Francisco.
Wow.
Which is just like such a different world.
That's awesome. Well, and then the
gala banquet and big speeches were given and all the university officials were there and the mayor of San Francisco and you name it, everybody was there, including an English professor from Cal named Charles Mills Gayley.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
Charles Mills Gayley was inspired by all of this and wrote a song, the very first Cal fight song, right, called The Golden Bear.
Right. He was particularly impressed by the banners that they had carried throughout the trip, which is a blue banner with a golden bear embroidered on it. I've always assumed from the California state flag is where they got the idea for the bear, because it looks a lot like, except it's going the opposite way, I believe, than the bear on the flag.
Sure.
But They had these two banners, only one of which I think still survives. I don't know what happened to the other one, but it does still exist. And looking at those banners, he wrote this song called "The Golden Bear," and people just were like, "Yeah, that's what we need to be. We need to be the Golden Bears."
That's so awesome to think, that was what had inspired all of it in terms of our identity as a sports team, and now we're forever more known as the Golden Bears.
And our first, as you said, our first school fight song.
That's right.
Which includes a line about our silent, sturdy golden bear. So sturdy golden bear goes back to the very beginning. We've always been sturdy.
That's right. Well, Reese Davis would probably love to hear that from ESPN, since he always refers to us as the sturdy Golden Bears. So
it's pretty great. I do love sturdy Golden Bear. It's a great phrase.
Yeah. It's a word that's not used often enough anymore.
Right. We need to be sturdier, more sturdy. So that's the story of our amazing 1895 track team, their triumphant tour of the East Coast.
What gave birth to the Golden Bears and allows me to say, go Bears.
Go Bears.
Thanks so much, Leslie. We'll catch you next episode. There's nothing better than being a Golden Bear. How fun was that to learn how we got the name? And how cool is it that we were the first university to compete in any sport against schools back east? That's some awesome history right there. Say what you will about other schools on the West Coast, but there's no question Cal was the first to field dominant sports teams in that era. Before we wrap things up, can I ask you to please take a quick moment to like and subscribe? That will really help us reach other like-minded Cal fans. And please help tell the whole damn world about us by sharing us with all your Cal friends. Simply share on the social media platform of your choice and tell them to go to tellthewholedamnworld.com. You can also tell them to follow us on X, better known as Twitter, at Win4Cal. That's Win, the number 4, Cal. Be sure to catch our next episode when it drops on Monday. We're delighted to spend some time with Grant Merrick, the editor-in-chief of SF Gate, who used to be the sports editor of the Daily Cal. He recently wrote a fantastic article about the Bears Lair that used to be a wonderful meeting spot and sports bar back in the day on Lower Sproul. And if you like Top Dog, you owe Grant a huge thank you. You'll want to tune in Monday to learn all about it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We sincerely appreciate all of you out there listening and watching. See you Monday. This podcast is about celebrating all things Cal and the prominent people who are passionate about the University of California. Do you feel Cal is the center of the universe? Do you bleed blue and gold? We want you to tell the whole damn world about it. Go Bears!